Lagi prepare.
Nanti Raja ini Zoom.
Nanti awak bilang kan.
Oh ni nak dia nak on law tu kan?
So, okay kan? Yes, yes.
Ya, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay. Um, Okay, recite Al-Fatiha. Bismillah. Okay, this is just an informal meeting between us for any concerns that you want to bring up, because we will have a meeting. Actually, the Istac management meeting will be held at the end of each month. So if you have any concerns that you want to say, we will have a formal meeting with all the deputy deans, heart-to-heart session, inshallah. I think 30th, yeah? On the 30th. On the 30th. How did what's it? Okay, so okay, so this is an informal session just to hear your concerns, if any. Please, anyone? Any concerns? Yeah, yeah. Starting with Adam, maybe if you want to have something. Please, please, anything, any concerns, or your concerns, or you want to say anything?
I hear your concerns.
Oh, really?
Okay. Inshallah, we'll be starting shortly, inshallah. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Professor Dr. Osman, Professor Sardar, Prof. Fauzan, Prof. all the great professors, and Prof. Jasir. I think this is a meeting of the great minds today here. We are very much honored at the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization to have you here today and to have our guest of honor, our speaker today, Dr. Stefano. Welcome to Istac IIUM. It's an honor to have you here today. And we have, though the university actually is in vacation, but because of the importance of the lecture and the title you put, many of our scholars, researchers, postgraduate students are here with us. Also, we have people are following from the Zoom and also the Istac YouTube channel. It's wonderful to have our brother here and to discuss the issue of elements in Islam and sciences. I think it's a very important topic. For your information, we have been inviting scholars, Muslims and non-Muslims, to address our community here. If you remember, last year we invited Professor George Northoff, the professor in neurology, in philosophy, and in psychology. We invited also other philosophers and scholars from Hong Kong, from China, and Alhamdulillah, today we get our brother from Italy. And it is really our endeavor to provide that environment of intellectual discussions, intellectual discourse, and engagement. So this is our aim, brothers and sisters. Without any delay, I will just forward to Dr. Ain, our moderator, to moderate the session. You go ahead.
Thank you, our beloved Dean, Professor Abdulaziz. Very good. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, our honorable guest and dear students, it is a great honor and privilege to welcome you all to this special lecture organized by International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, entitled Elements in Islam and Sciences. And today we have the pleasure of hosting Professor Dr. Stefano Biliardi from Al Akhawain University in Ifrain, Morocco. And Prof. Biliardi is an accomplished scholar, co-editor of the prestigious Cambridge University Press series, Elements in Islam and the Sciences, and a leading figure in the intersection of philosophy, science, and Islamic studies. And allow me to provide a brief introduction to our distinguished speaker. Prof. Stefano Biliardi completed his undergraduate studies in philosophy in 2004 at the University of Bologna with a thesis on the Kantian elements in the philosophy of language of Robert Brandom under the guidance of Professor E. Picardi. And he later obtained his PhD in philosophy of science in 2008 from the University of Bologna in joint supervision with the University of Constance, Germany. His thesis focused on the concept of belief, was written under esteemed supervision of Professor M.C. Golovati and Professor Spohan, two leading European experts in probability and formal epistemology. And Prof. Biliardi's postdoctoral research has been an intellectual journey that bridges Western analytical philosophical perspectives with the study of Islam and the science-religion relationship. And his postdoc project was initially supported by a fellowship at the University of Constance Excellence Cluster, the Cultural Foundations of Integration, where he also served as a language teacher for 5 years. And he later joined the faculty of CMS at Lund University in Sweden, where he contributed as a researcher and lecturer from 2011 to 2013. And later he continued his journey to Tecnológico do Monterrey in Mexico City, where he taught philosophy from 2013 to 2015. So he also was a fellow at the Foundation for Interreligious and Intercultural Research and Dialogue in Geneva, Switzerland. And later in August 2020, Professor Biliardi has been serving as an associate professor of philosophy at Al Akhawain University. And additionally, since 2021, he has co edited alongside the astrophysicist Professor Nidal Gesum of the American University of Sharjah, the Cambridge University Press Element Series, Islam and the Sciences. So without further ado, we give the floor to Professor Biliardi.
Thank you so much for the very kind introduction and for the perfect pronunciation of my family name that for some reason everyone finds intimidating. So, good afternoon, everyone, respected dean, respected professors, colleagues, and dear students, dear audience. I'm really honored to be here today, which is also my first day, if we count the hours in Malaysia. Um, and to be sharing my knowledge. I'm here to talk, definitely, but I'm also here to listen. I've actually prepared a presentation. If we can show the slides, if they are available. And of course, I'm looking forward to your feedback. I'm looking forward to your questions. I'm looking forward to having some fruitful discussion. Yes. Uh, yeah, if we can open the latest version, please. Okay. Um, as it was correctly stated during the introduction, I am currently co-editing a series on Islam and the sciences, whereby sciences we understand principally the natural sciences, with Professor Nidal Gusum, astrophysicist, currently serving at the American University of Sharjah in the Emirates. And the research that I will try to share today is the research that has been kept me busy over the past 6 months. During my sabbatical, I spent a sabbatical leave in my home country in Italy, and the focus of such research is the intersection of Islam and pseudoscience. We know that there are multiple attempts at conceptualizing the harmony of Islam and science, but unfortunately, there is also a certain amount of fake science, if you will, or something that is looks like science but is not quite science, that goes with it. And I mobilized my competence in philosophy in order to focus on it. So what I'll be offering today is a map of sorts of the kinds of pseudoscience that not always, but quite often go together with Islam. And let me add, on a personal slash scholarly note, that substantial inspiration for this work came from a pioneering article by Professor Sardar. Professor, yes, you may remember Between Two Masters, Quran or Science, 1985, if I'm not mistaken, the article in which you take issue with the so-called Ijaz Elmi. I still read it with my students in class. And although you did not use the specific term pseudoscience, the concept you were expressing was pretty much that. Okay, so any chance we get my slides? Okay, sure, no problem. Oh, yes. In fact, I was going to mention Al Akhawain based on the first slide, because you will see two pictures. The first one is a picture of your respected institution, and the second one, the upper picture, is a picture from of my university. Al Akhawain University in Iran was established around 30 years ago, 28, if I'm not mistaken. It's a public university in Morocco, so it's state-owned, but it's independent. Uh, Language of instruction is English, and it's a liberal arts university, meaning it's an American-style university, if you will. We have three schools: the School of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, which is my school. We have the School of Business Administration, and the School of Science and Engineering. But regardless of the specific degree that they are seeking, all students have to take the so-called common core courses, including courses in philosophy and philosophical thought and in history of ideas. which is basically what I'm teaching there in English. And the courses I've been imparting since I joined in 2016 include a course very much, I would say, beloved by students about Islam and modern science, including a unit, I have to say, on Professor Sardar's critique of Ijaz Ilmi. Okay, so any progress? Any, okay. Uh,
Any tips in regards to, journal?
Yeah, regarding the series that I am co-editing with Professor Nidal Gassoum, um, well, as the very name says, uh, it's yeah, it's about the substantial intersections of Islam and the natural sciences. After an introductory booklet co-authored by Professor Gassoum and me about past, current, and future debates, we are planning on having each year a certain amount of booklets, each one written by a top scholar in the field or specializing in a sub-branch of the debate on Islam and science. Oh, great. Maybe we can share it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Perfect. Okay, so yeah, this is the first slide I was mentioning earlier. The picture above represents, shows the administrative building of my university. And in case you wonder, that is not photoshopped. It's snow. It snows in Ifran. It's up in the mountains. It snows in particular in January and February. So yeah, this is a little index of content. I'm going to talk a bit about my background, although it was perfectly reconstructed in the introduction. I'll tell you about my collaboration with an Italian rationalist organization by the name of CICAP, that's how you pronounce it. Then I'll provide you with a quick definition of pseudoscience and related philosophical problems. Then I'll provide you with some examples of pseudoscience in the Muslim world. Little disclaimer or warning, this is going to be a bit controversial. Finally, I'll tell you about my approach, my teaching method, so how I discuss these topics, the topics that I will be covering with my students, most of which are Moroccan and Muslim. And finally, I'll be sharing with you some research questions that I'd love to receive your input on. And as I said, I'm here to talk, but I'm here to listen as well. So yeah, my education, originally was in the field of analytic philosophy and the philosophy of science. It did not include Islamic studies, but I have always cultivated a personal passion for Arabic language and for the Muslim world. But then I decided to take up formally upon completing my PhD. I did my PhD in a branch of philosophy that is known as formal epistemology. But after completing my dissertation, I just found that I wanted to study ideas that really had an impact on people's lives. So I decided to take up the contemporary debate on religion and science with a particular focus on modern Islam. And that's what I've been doing over the past 12, 13, 14 years. Time flies. So currently my areas of research are Islam and modern science, but also new religious movements in science, new religious movements that are also known as sects or cults. And I published a Cambridge element on new religious movements in science last year. By the way, if anyone is interested in reading any of these books, they can send me an email and I'll be very happy to share a PDF, especially if you afterwards write a review of my work. So I have two hats, and that's what the picture in the middle stands for. On the one hand, I do history of ideas, but also ethnography in the sense that since I reconstruct modern debates, I describe what I see, I describe what I hear, I describe what is going on. But still, due to my original education, I'm a philosopher at heart, so I engage in philosophical critique and criticism as well, in particular when science is conceptualized in a certain way that I am not too happy with. The book that you see over there, the smallest one, is a book that I published 10 years ago, Islam and the Quest for Modern Science, and it contains different conversations with authors, including scientists, who detailed to me the way in which they regarded, they perceived the harmony of Islam and science, and I can share that book as well. Also, I'm a little bit of an activist, if you will, as in like a public intellectual. I do not have a formal affiliation, but I have been working for more than a decade with the Italian Committee for the Investigation of the Claims of the Pseudosciences, or in Italian, Comitato Italiano per il Controllo delle Affermazioni sulle Pseudoscienze, also known as CICAP, a non-profit skeptical educational organization that was founded in 1989 by different intellectuals, including the late science journalist Piero Angela, that you see me with in the picture above. I give regular presentations at their festival that usually takes place in October in Padua. And by the way, speaking of Padua, I forgot to mention that the picture you see here next to my index of contents is a reconstruction of Galileo Galilei's microscope. He did work with telescopes, but he had microscopes as well. We don't have the original ones, but this is a reconstruction since, well, he was from there. I just thought he was teaching in Padua. I was just reminded of it while reading about CICAP. And it was CICAP that published my book, general public book on Islam and pseudoscience, titled La Mezzaluna e la Luna Dimezzata. And for those of you who do not speak Italian, it means the crescent and the splitting moon. And the picture makes reference to that legend, if you will, urban legend, according to which American astronauts found evidence of the splitting of the moon during one of their missions. My current work on Islam and pseudoscience also draws on the work that I produced on the occasion of the publication while writing that book. So what is pseudoscience? Pseudoscience is difficult to define. Here is a couple of definitions from major online dictionaries. Cambridge Dictionary defines pseudoscience as a system of thought or a theory that is not formed in a scientific way. This is a rather broad definition. The Collins English Dictionary defines pseudoscience as a discipline or approach that pretends to be or has a close resemblance to science. According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, a system of theories, assumptions, and methods erroneously regarded as scientific. These definitions may look plain and simple. In fact, they are. All dictionary definitions have to be, but they take a lot for granted. In particular, they take for granted that the reader is familiar with a definition of science, but anyone who has studied philosophy of science a bit knows that, in fact, science is far from having been defined in a clear-cut way. And also, you have to consider that the word pseudoscience is formed with science, again, which invokes some definition of science, and with pseudo, which is a prefix of Greek origin, ancient Greek. So it has to do with the idea, with the concept of pretending, of lying, of conveying a false appearance. And this is also why the word pseudoscience is not something that people use to define themselves. Nobody self-identifies as a pseudoscientist. Or to put it in the words of an expert, a world-class expert, Michael Gordon, in his book, The Pseudoscience Wars, quote, "No one in the history of the world has ever self-identified as pseudoscientist. There is no person who wakes up in the morning and thinks to himself, I just head into my pseudo laboratory and perform some pseudo experiments to try to confirm my pseudo theories with pseudo facts. So this makes the notion of pseudoscience particularly difficult to handle. Um, in my booklet, the one that I should publish next year for the series Islam and the Sciences, I do not really provide a broad definition of pseudoscience. I do not solve this problem, but my assumption is the following. All philosophers who take up the study and definition of pseudoscience agree that there are many cases that fall into a gray area of sorts. But they also acknowledge that pseudoscience does exist. Pseudoscience and science are placed on a spectrum. Then again, in between, there may be a gray area, but my contention is that the forms of pseudoscience that I describe in the book and that one finds in combination with Islam would be acknowledged as forms of pseudoscience by my philosophical colleagues. And then again, I realize, I understand this is quite controversial, and I'm curious and eager to listen to your feedback on this. In case you want to dig deeper into the problem, the philosophical problem of pseudoscience, I can recommend 3 works. The first 2 are edited volumes. The first one is more philosophical, Philosophy of Pseudoscience, by my philosophical colleagues Massimo Pigliucci and Baudry. Pigliucci is Italian, but is based in the US, 2013. This collection can be a bit technical at times, but it's very good. A more pedagogic work is Pseudoscience, The Conspiracy Against Science. Of course, it's a thought-provoking title by Kaufman and Kaufman, 2018. Also a thick edited volume. For those of you who do not have much time but still want to get familiar with the basics of pseudoscience and its philosophical discussion, including some very interesting examples, then I recommend Pseudoscience, a very short introduction, again by Michael D. Gordon, published last year. So why do I think that working on Islam and pseudoscience is important? I think it's important, first and foremost, as an educator. I think it's important because the harmony of Islam and science, real science, is very important for contemporary, for modern Muslim faith. But pseudosciences only create the illusion of a harmony between religion and science. So they damage the pedagogy and the practice of science, but they also damage the credibility of the very debate on Islam and science, and they can damage faith as well. Here I'm citing the words and the thoughts of my dear friend and colleague and co-editor of the Cambridge series, Professor Nidal Gesum. He points out that if someone relies for their faith, for their beliefs on a fake harmonization of Islam and science, upon realizing that what they thought was science is in fact not science, but pseudoscience, they run the risk of losing their faith as well. So again, this is a reason that regarded confessionally, of course, to consider the debate on Islam and pseudoscience particularly important, particularly urgent as a conversation within the broader conversation on Islam and science. Also, pseudoscience can induce harmful choices, especially in relation to health. As I said, it brings discredit to the very discussion of Islam, religion, and science. And again, as many Muslim critics point out, pseudoscientific approaches to Islam could hurt one's faith if a Muslim deeply invested in them eventually realizes how erroneous they are. So here, I think, is a very interesting area of collaboration between Muslims, non-Muslims, and students in Islamic studies and students in philosophy and epistemology. Now, some examples of what, according to current philosophical definitions of pseudoscience, may count as Islam-related pseudoscience. First of all, the so-called ijaz ilmi, or scientific miraculousness, or at least some manifestations of it. On day one, whenever I impart my course on Islam and science, I ask my students, do you think that your faith harmonizes with science? And if so, how? If so, why? And the answer they invariably give me is that yes, Islam is in harmony with science because the Quran contains indeed predicted many scientific notions with accuracy that were only discovered, were only studied later on with precision by modern science. So Ijaz Ilmi, of all the the sub discourses that I will be touching on today, probably the most popular one. It's deeply seated, it's deeply ingrained, culturally speaking. It has been studied by scholars over the past 10 years. Now we know that it originates in 19th century, late 19th century debates and articles that you could find in Cairo, in Damascus. But it became particularly visible in the 20th century. In particular, there was this book by a French physician, Maurice Bucaille, La Bible, le Coran et la Science, the Bible, the Quran, and Science. A book that didn't contain anything original, but that gave a lot of visibility to this discourse. And there are many authors, including some with a scientific background, that built very I would say, rewarding careers on that. One of them is the Egyptian geologist Zaghloul al-Najjar, or al-Naggar, if you want to say it the Egyptian way, with whom I was having a conversation over there. That's a much younger me. That's pretty much around the time we first met. Professor Sardar and I first met in Sharjah. And also another author who's important as well for another pseudoscientific discourse that I will mention is the Turk Harun Yahya. Well, Professor Al-Najjar or Al-Naggar is a geologist. Harun Yahya, I think he studied philosophy and interior architecture, interior design. We met in Istanbul more than 10 years ago. I think that these days is a bit more difficult to visit because he's sitting in a Turkish jail, I think, yes. But yeah, then again, more often than not, people do not realize his very problematic background, and I would say also his very problematic persona. He has inundated, he has flooded the net with different articles, and he's still influential to some extent. What is wrong about Ijaz Ilmi? I wouldn't say that it is always pseudoscientific. Very often, Ijaz Ilmi stems from very good intentions. Again, as Professor Sardar was pointing out in his 1985 article, Between Two Masters, Quran or Science. But it raises several problems. One problem is that quite often the authors who practice this kind of interpretation of the Quran stretch the verses of the Quran in order to find or to pretend to find science in it. And also, I think that Ijaz Ilmi becomes pseudoscientific, so it falls within the field of pseudoscience, when instead of using science to understand the Quran, which would be, technically speaking, tafsir ilmi, not Ijaz Ilmi, tafsir ilmi, so a scientific interpretation, authors pretend to derive scientific knowledge directly from the book. And again, according to some definitions of pseudoscience, at least, this would qualify as pseudoscientific. Another problematic field is that of evolution and Islam. Let me just reconstruct briefly the richness of the positions that you currently can find among Muslims. Over there, you can see cover of one of the Arabic translations of Darwin's book, The Origin of Species. Something that people tend to forget, though, is that modern evolution was formulated at the same time by two scientists. One was Charles Darwin, and the other one was Alfred Russel Wallace. Wallace was much younger than Darwin. He was inspired by him. And he was working in this part of the world. He was collecting specimens when he had this intuition that then he put down in a letter that he sent to Darwin, who then was felt urged to publish The Origin of Species. And what is interesting is that while he was working here, Wallace had an aide, a young boy by the name of Ali, Muslim, and they could communicate together in Ali's native tongue. Wallace was quite good at languages. Well, we don't know. In fact, there is no evidence. So I'm just using my imagination here. But I had some interesting exchanges with Wallace scholars, and they agreed with me that if Wallace was fluent enough in Ali's language, if they had a conversation about evolution, the way in which Wallace was conceiving of it in his head, then Ali, young Ali, technically was the first Muslim who was exposed to a modern formulation of evolution from one of its historical discoverers. And then again, Ali was very fond of Wallace. He valued their friendship a lot. Ali nowadays is acknowledged as a naturalist in his own right. And after Wallace's departure, he took Wallace's family name. So you can find an entry about him under Ali Wallace in Wikipedia and Britannic and so on. And over there, something a bit less scientific, which is Harun Yahya's notorious Atlas of Creation. Now, one of the reasons why, as an historian of ideas, of modern ideas, why I find evolution in Islam so fascinating is that you can find so many positions among contemporary Muslims. And also, evolution is differently taught in Muslim countries. So, for instance, Saudi Arabia is creationism oriented, as in evolution is completely rejected. In Iran, well, you may say Iran is Shia, but it still qualifies as Muslim. To a scholar in the history of ideas, evolution is taught while leaving out human evolution, which doesn't mean human evolution is rejected, but it's simply not touched upon in school and university books. Whereas, as I said, in Saudi Arabia, it's totally rejected, and Darwin is depicted as a Western devil who has even corrupted Muslim scientists. And among intellectuals, you find a very interesting, very broad palette of positions with many nuances. So, for instance, you have full rejection of evolution or creationism. Here you find a brief list, but please don't get me wrong, I'm not lumping together these authors. It's just that they equally reject evolution, but then they come to this rejection in different ways, and they have different degrees of depth. But just to mention a few contemporary Muslim authors who reject evolution, we have Sayyid Hussein Nasr, we have Adnan Oktar, also known as Harun Yahya. Again, not a scientist, not a philosopher, but immensely popular, so that's why we have to talk about him. We have Zakir Naik, another immensely popular preacher with a background in medicine. And also you have Qunaybi, Professor Qunaybi, I think is based in Jordan. And he's a very successful YouTuber. He has a whole series of videos dismantling evolution. Then you have human exceptionalism. You have those who think that Darwin and Wallace got the picture right. So everything evolved except for humanity. Humans were the objects of a special creation, and everything started with Adam and Eve. This position has a parallel one in Christianity, by the way, among Christians. Then you have a position that has been, I would say, given a lot of visibility lately, in particular by a young scholar whose name is Shoaib Ahmed Malik, but he was drawing on ideas that were advanced originally by another scholar, by another author called Jalajil, David Solomon Jalajil. And their position is Adamic exceptionalism. It's a bit more complex, I would say, a bit more sophisticated than human exceptionalism. So to put it in a nutshell, in nuce, as they say, um, according to Adamic exceptionalism, humans may have evolved. So since the Quran does not say anything about pre-Adamic humans, according to these authors, Muslims can accept the idea that humanity evolved. Um, but then again, at some point, there must have been a very special couple, Adam and Eve, that was miraculously created, so without parents. And this is what Adamic exceptionalism is about. The difference between Adamic exceptionalism and human exceptionalism is that, according to human exceptionalism, humans were created as we see them, and everything started with Adam and Eve. According to Adamic exceptionalism, human evolution is acceptable, but then at some point, like this very special couple was miraculously created and dropped, so to speak, and then probably interacted and reproduced with humans that had already evolved. Finally, you also have Muslim scientists and authors, including my very good friends, again, Nidal Gassum, I'm mentioning Nidal a lot today, but also the Palestinian Jordanian molecular biologist Rana Dajani, who think that Adam and Eve is a sacred story about what it means to be human, rather than an account with, a scientific account or an historical account. And they think that, well, all humans evolved with no exceptions. Again, I realize that this is a controversial position, but I have to take it to account while reconstructing the contemporary landscape and evolution in Islam. And I have to say that sometimes, or perhaps often, in the whole discourse on evolution in Islam, especially when it comes to certain forms of creationism, we do encounter pseudoscience, especially when the critics of pseudoscience distort the science of evolution in order to claim it's not valid, or that, that basically it's not science. And one interesting thing that happens is that some creationists, including Professor Qunaybi, call evolution pseudoscience. So there is this war of labels, if you will. Those who attack evolution in pseudoscientific fashion call evolution itself pseudoscientific. I also find this fascinating in a sense. And finally, there are some forms of pseudoscience that are connected to medicine or compete with medicine. You have prophetic medicine, where people read tradition. They identify certain forms of medicine, certain forms of healing that were used and praised by the prophets, and claim that they have validity even today. Something similar is done with Quranic healing, where people identify certain herbs or certain plants mentioned in the Quran and claim again that the Quran predicted with accuracy their medical virtues. And again, some forms, some practices in this field do qualify as pseudoscientific. And generally speaking, broadly speaking, the very idea of looking into religious tradition for medical information can be quite problematic. And again, I will reference the position of my friend and colleague, Professor Nidal Gessoum, who points out that, of course, the Prophet would appreciate and praise certain forms of medicine that were popular and valid in his time and age. And of course, he would recommend his contemporaries to use them, but this doesn't mean, according to him, again, as a Muslim from a confessional perspective, that we should jump from this to claiming that everything that was done 14 years ago, every form of therapy, should be regarded as valid today. Um, Pseudoscience, interestingly, is currently criticized by different authors with very different backgrounds and goals. So you have Muslim scientists like Nidal Gesum, who has a very popular YouTube channel in Arabic. Those who criticize pseudoscience as scientists, so based on their competence, on their scientific competence, but also confessionally, they obviously do not reject Islam. Then you also have ex-Muslims, and this is very problematic. People basically who self-identify as atheists or agnostic and have a background in Islam. A good example is the Egyptian activist Sharif Gaber, extremely popular. I happen to be familiar with his ideas quite well because I wrote an article with some students at Al Akhawain University on his videos, and he's more often than not quite oversimplified views on religion and science. And he debunks pseudoscience combined with Islam. But again, his goal is sadly to discredit Islam, sadly from a confessional perspective. And then you also have more neutral internet pages like I Believe in Science, أنا أصدق العلم, or العلوم الحقيقية, the real sciences, that basically are translating and popularizing articles from organizations like the Italian one I work with. By the way, since I'm mentioning how pseudoscience is attacked by authors with an anti-religious agenda, something that I forgot to mention is that the Italian rationalist organization, pro-science rationalist organization I work with, is not anti-religious at all. It only criticizes pseudoscience when there is some kind of empirical claim, so something that can be verified, but it doesn't challenge theology, doesn't challenge the clergy, it doesn't challenge faith. And it is precisely in that vein that I also wrote the book in Italian about pseudoscience, and it's exactly the same methodology that I've been following while working on my Cambridge booklet on Islam and pseudoscience. What do I do in class? Since I teach courses on Islam and modern science, including mention and discussion of the conversation on Islam and pseudoscience. Here, I have provided you with a list of ideas, of suggestions that I follow. They're not in order of importance. I just listed them randomly. So, first of all, I'm very open about my background and about my pedagogic goals. Everything is described in the syllabus, and students know very well that they are going to be exposed to a variety, a diversity of ideas and sources. But the goal of the course definitely is not, to shake their faith or to challenge their beliefs, but to show them how different Muslim thinkers think differently about multiple topics, including evolution. Mostly, I try to spread a scientific, scholarly, critical mindset, which can be challenging at times. Especially with my students, because they are very young, because they are not used to the method of teaching. Our classes at Al Akhawain are not frontal lectures, but they're more like conversations in which students have to come up with their own ideas. They have to participate in research. They have to challenge the views that we explore in class. And again, sometimes it's difficult to train them because before joining our university, they have not been exposed to anything of sorts. So for instance, for them, philosophy, which is my main field, is a subject to be memorized, not a subject to be discussed. No one is graded over the stance that they take at the end of the course on specific issues. So, for instance, I I have no problem in stating very openly that I fully embrace evolution, including for human beings, and that I find certain forms of creationism very problematic. But then again, after exposing my students to the whole palette, to all the positions that one can identify in the modern Islamic landscape, if they want to stick to creationism, if they still want to reject evolution, they're not penalized in terms of grade at the end of the course. As long as they show awareness that there also exist other positions, and insofar as they are able to argue, they are able to defend their own point, it's fine. So it's about educating them. It's not. It's about enriching their knowledge. It's not about having them change their stance. Also, one thing I do in my courses in history of ideas, I clearly reconstruct the method of science. Again, students are used to memorizing things. They're not used to absorbing methods, in particular, not the method of science. And it's very important to provide them with clear illustrations, including historical examples. So what I do in the course on Islam and science, I start with historical cases like that of Galileo Galilei and that of Charles Darwin, which also provide them with a nice narrative introduction to what doing science is about. I adopt an intercultural approach. So, for instance, I show them that claims about scientific miracles are advanced in other religions as well. I involve experts in science with a religious background. So my students regularly have meetings with scientists like Professor Rana Dajani, Professor Nidal Gessoum, that interact with us either in person or via Zoom, via Teams, online. And students cover readings, cover texts authored by them, discuss them in class, and then they get the opportunity to discuss these ideas directly with the authors in question, face to face. And it's always very interesting. And all positions about a given topic or problem are reconstructed with clarity and completeness. So again, although I personally embrace evolution, including human evolution, I make sure that all positions regarding, for instance, evolution and Islam are laid out for my students, and that each and every position is reconstructed in detail, including the arguments that are advanced to defend it. Again, it's all about enriching the students' knowledge, and it's not about converting them, like having them shift from one position to another. Research questions, a couple of questions that have been guiding me while exploring Islam or Islam-related pseudoscience. How does the debate on Islam and pseudoscience relate to the epistemological debate on pseudoscience and vice versa? Can they profitably merge? What do I mean by this? Well, earlier I mentioned several books, a few books about pseudoscience. Well, all these books have been written by colleagues of mine who have practically no knowledge about the contemporary Muslim world. So you will hardly find anything about Islam and pseudoscience in those books. And also, so far, with a few brilliant exceptions, the critics of pseudoscience in the Muslim world are scientists who are mostly interested in debunking specific examples of pseudoscience, but they have no philosophical background. So I'm one of the very few people who work on merging the two fields. I think that philosophers, like the authors of these books and the essays contained in the edited volumes, could learn a lot from case studies from the Muslim world. It would be very healthy, intellectually speaking, for them, getting familiar with what is happening in other parts of the world. But I also think that Muslim critics of pseudoscience could increase their philosophical knowledge. They should get more familiar with the philosophy of pseudoscience in order basically to become sharper. I mean, their critical skills can only improve if they get exposed to more philosophical discussion about pseudoscience. What else? Are there any forms of pseudoscience that are ultimately like essential, are ultimately inextricable from core Islamic beliefs, or do Islam and pseudoscience invariably go hand in hand? I think the answer is no. The very fact that there exist positions like that of Professor Sardar or Professor Gassoum, like scientists who have also faith, who are also believers, and who criticize pseudoscience, so who leave out certain positions, practically demonstrate that although quite often pseudoscience is combined with Islam, it doesn't need to be the case. Then again, I'm not qualified to make normative statements about Islam, but that's what I observe again as an ethnographer. Does pseudoscience negatively affect the Muslim world, and does it permeate the Muslim world more than other parts of the world? This is a question I was asking myself, and it's also a question that I regularly ask my interlocutors, my colleagues who criticize pseudoscience and have a background, have a Muslim background. Well, we have no statistics. Probably more work has to be done in that field. But we don't think that there is more pseudoscience in the Muslim world than in any other part of the world. In fact, more often than not, what you find is pseudoscience in Islamic garb. But then if you look at the theory, if you look at the narrative, if you strip it down of certain Islamic elements, you find precisely the same thing in the Western world. And the case in point is creationism. Harun Yahya didn't write anything original. He basically copied and pasted from American creationists. So this is a very good example of how pseudoscience can take on an Islamic garb, but it's not essentially Islamic, or it's not specifically, especially Islamic. Are there any forms of pseudoscience that are exclusively typical of Islam? No, I don't think so. Of course, the moment something is related to the Quran, then you can say it is something that is distinctly or distinctively Islamic about it. But again, I'm originally a philosopher of science, so I'm used to observing like the structure, the logical structure of theories, discourses, and narratives. And again, once you blow away that Islamic garb, you will see that pseudoscience is pretty much the same all over the world in different cultures. Is it possible to create broad consensus among the critics of pseudoscience? Again, I was mentioning earlier that there are different authors, different fields. So you have Muslim scientists, but you also have ex-Muslims or atheists. Here, I'm afraid no consensus is possible. Why? Basically because this part, like these critics, those who are represented by this young man on the right. Again, I took a couple of screenshots from his YouTube channel because I'm particularly familiar with him, but there are many. But people like him think that pseudoscience is particularly irrational, but they also think that all of religion is irrational. So basically, they attack pseudoscience as part of a more general attack on religion. And of course, this outlook is not shared by people like Professor Nidal Gassoum. And in this sense, although superficially you may say there is a common enemy with that is pseudoscience, I think it is very, very difficult to construct like deep, real, essential agreement. And yeah, I think we can conclude with a quote. It's the very last paragraph from my manuscript that hopefully after peer review will be published next year. It starts with a Marxian sentence of sorts, but yeah, it expresses in a few lines my current take on pseudoscience. A specter is haunting the global discourse on Islam and modern science, the specter of pseudoscience. The very fact that Islam-related pseudoscience is identified and criticized by Muslims and non-Muslims, including atheists, is highly suggestive that the specter does exist. So if people with very different agendas converge in identifying something called Islam-related pseudoscience, then perhaps there is something like Islam-related pseudoscience, although again, there is one field that attacks it while attacking all of Islam. Multiple critics keep chasing and fighting its diverse, ubiquitous, interconnected, and powerful manifestations. The hunt for Islam-related pseudoscience also results in uncovering conceptions and malpractices that accompany and favor pseudoscience itself. Let me just elaborate on this a bit. One of the reasons why pseudoscience can become so popular is that people are not sufficiently educated in things science. They do not know how to distinguish science from what is not not science. So yeah, there is. There are conceptions and malpractices, including, for instance, memorizing science instead of learning science as a method, that create an especially favorable environment for pseudoscience to thrive. I did not discuss them today, but I do mention them in my conclusions cited here. Many critics of Islam-related pseudoscience have a scientific background and are less interested in philosophical discussions. However, they may benefit from more engagement with the contemporary philosophy of science. The very differences in the critics' backgrounds raise a whole array of challenges. It would be insincere and counterproductive to downplay all the obstacles and challenges. I was very open about them today. The hunt is frustrating and never-ending. My suggestion, however, is to keep confronting the specter instead of running away from it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. Biliardi. We have a very great fan right there, Professor. He's already raising his hand. So we'll give the floor to Professor Jasser, please.
Well, thank you, Prof, for your expose on the Islamic pseudosciences. I'm afraid this would be, I would label it, no offense, scientific pseudo-Islamic. In the sense that you come from a science background and you have certain truths. And that's how you judge or you classify an idea to be a pseudoscience. But if you come from an Islamic studies perspective, you don't want to fall into a pseudo-Islamic studies in the sense that because you believe in science, you go against truths from the Islamic. Obviously, these truths are held by Muslims. I'll give you a few examples in way of feedback. This is the dialogue, perhaps, that you asked to have. You mentioned so many popular people and so on, but truth from the Islamic perspective is not about popularism. We don't get Islamic ideas from YouTubers who have millions of followers. This is not a reference for any Islamic idea. For example, you mentioned the Ali who dealt with Darwin and so on. Ali was not the first person who dealt with evolution. Al-Farabi wal-Qazwini wal-Rumi wa-Ibn Khaldun talked about the evolution. Ibn Khaldun talked about the evolution of humans from metal, etc. So truly Islamic studies knows that the idea of evolution as an original idea is not new. And the interpretation of the Quran as what you called creationism, because you come from a science perspective. If you come from an Islamic truth perspective, it's not called creationism, it's called creation. And yes, creation could take stages and so forth. Scholars differed over that. You mentioned people who self-identify as this and that is also not truth from the Islamic studies perspective, because in Islamic studies, we don't identify people based on their identification. We classify people from an outside criteria based on the truths of the Quran. You mentioned, the Harun Yahya and like these kinds of people. And it's quite problematic that this is an example of an Islamic approach because the person self-identifies as Muslim versus people like Zaghlul Najjar, who comes from an Islamic perspective. You could disagree or agree, but at the end, the divine script is truth. And a scholar who is trying to do an interpretation is using his or her human experience and human sciences anyway. Could be right and could be wrong. The wrong would be to claim that this is the final tafsir or the final interpretation, but to have a view that this ayah about embryos is actually similar to what we know about embryos, but also keeping it open for perhaps a change of science, because science at the end is not facts. Science is theories. Gravity is a theory. And if you want,
Gravity is also a fact if you jump from a very high building.
so science is a theory, Prof. Science, I did science. I have a PhD in science. I'm not a, sure, sir. So when you talk about science, sir, you are talking about theories. The more evidence you have, the more confirmed the theory becomes. Until at some point we call it a fact. But then eventually you might get into a shift in scientific thinking. And then we start to say, well, at the end, gravity was just a theory. Let us have gravity 2.0. So that's perhaps, I just wanted to make a few comments on that, and thank you very much.
If I may, I hope I will remember all your excellent comments. So let me briefly follow up on them. Yes, I agree that evolution, like any other idea, and I mean, as an historian of ideas, I know this very well, was not new in a sense. It's very hard, to pinpoint the moment when an idea is born. Then again, there were certain distinctive things about Darwin's and Wallace's formulation that you cannot find earlier. But while recalling the story, it's a story, it's not history of Ali, I used a qualifier. I said modern evolution. Then again, of course, there are many precedents. And by the way, it's good that you mentioned those precedents in Muslim history, in Islamic history. But if you read the recent monograph by Shoaib Ahmed Malik, you will see that he takes issue with that. He thinks that very often it is claimed that certain authors came up with pre-modern evolutionary ideas, but they were not quite such. So again, there is no consensus about that either. You point out that not each and every Muslim thinks the same way, and I agree with you. Again, and I'm not trying to lump them all together. I think I did what, in my perception at least, is the most respectful thing one can do from an external viewpoint when reconstructing a certain debate. I say there are certain people who self-identify as Muslim, and then in reference to idea so and so, in this case evolution, they advance the following interpretations. Then again, who's a real Muslim and who is not, I'm not qualified to say, I'm afraid. Concerning the embryo, again, not all tafsir ilmi is ijaz ilmi, and not everything is pseudoscience. But sometimes there are some, how can I say, egregious mistakes being committed that have nothing to do with the interpretation of the Quran in and of itself. They have to do with historical information. When you say, hey, the Quran talks about the development of the embryo, and nobody had studied that before, which is something that, by the way, I hear a lot in class from my students. I'm sorry, but that is not historically accurate because you have Greek philosophers talking about that centuries earlier. And that qualifies, in my opinion, as pseudoscientific. And we are not touching the Quran and its divinity here. We are touching, the historical framework within which the Quran is being discussed and appreciated. So I would say that is a wrong reason to appreciate the Quran. And it's a statement that can be very easily challenged. And when you say, these people are not real Muslim, again, I'm not certain people, including Harun Yahya. Again, I'm not qualified to say who's a real Muslim and who is not, but I'm to some extent qualified to say who's speaking about sound science and who is not. And I would encourage you to tell my students because those videos are precisely those they draw on when they form their opinions about a number of things. So very often, although students may find, for instance, Harun Yahya ludicrous when they look at his TV programs, then they realize that a couple of years earlier, they have been writing a paper about evolution, and they were actually citing his online articles. Why? Because they're all over the place. And I mean, they are the first resource that you find when you Google Islam and evolution, for instance. So yeah, I agree with you that not everyone is competent, not everyone is qualified. But not everyone is qualified to understand who's qualified. And that's why certain people are so influential and impactful. And yes, I would agree with Professor Sardar that gravity is a fact. I would not challenge that.
If I may. There are 3 or 4 fundamental mistakes that we Muslims make. So in criticizing him in terms of scientific truth, you actually did exactly what you're criticizing him for. Because your truth, Islamic truth, are not universal in the sense that not everybody in the world is Muslim and takes them as truth. So he does not necessarily take your Quranic truth as truth, right? Just as you don't necessarily take his scientific truth as truth. So there's no, what's a technical Kuhnian word, commensurability. That you cannot communicate on equal level. So that's the first thing, right? So we need the language for both people like us and Western scientists, so we can communicate without actually invoking that my truth is superior to your truth. Because that's it, in my opinion, a futile argument. But if you want to come back on that, that's.
I think
Prof, I spoke as a Muslim scholar, and therefore Islam is superior for any other truth.
Sorry?
And you might not believe in that, that's your issue, but I spoke as someone who is coming from an Islamic perspective.
Yeah, this is the point.
And Prof spoke from someone who comes from a scientific perspective, and that's his truth. So, like, it's
Okay, I think what this is, believe it or not, this is a problem of postmodernism.
Yeah,
I think
yes,
postmodernism has destroyed our sense of truth.
yes,
And so there's this notion of relativity and, everyone has their little truths and I have my Islamic truth and I have my scientific truth. There's only one truth, I'm sorry to say. And we can observe that, but we are going to take different interpretations as to how we arrive at said truths. And it's fine if you want to take a scientific approach, an Islamic approach, there will ultimately be fundamentally one truth, but we can't say, well, Islamic truth is superior because it comes from the Quran and the Hadith. The Hadith is flawed. There are hadiths out there that people practice that are ridiculous and they're not verifiable. But there are also sciences, which this is the point of pseudoscience, where people are going around saying, well, scientifically, I've investigated this and I've done a sample of 3, and therefore it is law. And it's like, no, that's bad science. So there's bad science, there's bad Islam, there is truth, and we have to observe that in the best way we possibly can. But I think it's important that we not just do this whole relativity thing and say, well, that's what you believe, and that's what I believe.
Yeah.
We need to have a better way of coming together, a common language of hopefully attaining higher truths, which, by the way, we as flawed little humans cannot appreciate or even understand in its infinite greatness.
Yeah, thank you. I think the point is where we start analyzing, things, from maybe you start with the evolution of Darwinism, and then one starts with the Quran. So it starts the categorization of science I mean, sorry, the categorization of that interpretation of evolution starts from where we start, from the Quran, from the Darwinism theory. So it's where we start, and there's different. The categorization depends on the lens we're taking, we're putting into into point. So
Sure,
So, yeah,
but
that's-
again, if I want to understand nature, I
Yeah.
observe nature.
yeah,
And my Muslim friends tell me, my Muslim friends who are also practicing scientists tell me that actually that is in harmony with their book, with the
Mhm.
revelation, since, if I'm not mistaken, it encourages believers to observe the natural world. So they regard their own activity as an act of worship. So there's a way of harmonizing them. There's a way of
Yes.
having both. But again, if I want to know how nature works, I, with all due respect, do not look for specific information in the sacred book. I look for it in the book of nature.
Thank you very much, Prof. In point of sociology of religion, Quran or the revealed religions are not the scientific books, number one. These are not scientific books in terms of revealed religions. Number two, the example from Turkey, Adnan Okuyar, is a wrong example. Adnan Okuyar, Harun Yahya. If you give an example, let's say Said Nursi or his disciples, are understandable. Adnan Okuyar studies psychology, not philosophy. As you mentioned rightly, he copy-pasted all the documents. And the Said Nursi is
I'm not sure I understood why that would be a wrong example.
a wrong example because this is an academic environment. Our sources should be caliber, not a person who is not accepted as a scientist in Turkish context, neither outside. But as I am Turk, I understand what Adnan Okuyar has done until today. That's why I am telling you, if you give example from Said Nursi or his disciples, because they are more caliber scientific. Okay, so the third thing is that you are coming from Italy, means that you have a huge Catholic history. I believe that the
Sorry, I'm
similar-
not Catholic. I'm sorry to contradict you. I'm not
The
Catholic.
country.
Being Italian doesn't mean you're automatically Catholic. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Generalization works time, but not always. Okay, thank you very much. Historically, the similar discussions probably going around in Catholicism and science. Can you give some examples, any discussions, any dialogues? I partially agree with Saad Roja through this problem because of the current age. But it does not mean that we individually lost our religions, our belief, our truth. I believe that Osman Bakarjan will clarify. Al-Ghazali already standardized this truth, I guess. I'm not philosopher. I'm looking at sociologically. That's why I am against your example, Adnan Okuyar. Not good example in Turkish context. He does not represent Islam. He does not represent science or scientific examples. Again, if you give other groups,
Okay, can you please give me
yes, thank
the
you.
example of who represents Islam on evolution?
Professor, you say you are teaching classes, right? We teach also. I do not give example from YouTubers. I use my own exactly taken photograph by myself from real life, authentic, right?
No, okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. You clarify. I am
Prof,
very
think
appreciative.
you go ahead. This wonderful discussion. Very good.
No, okay,
If-
sorry.
If I may come in. He is studying glasses. This is the subject of study, glasses. Like the glasses, he is now calling it pseudoscience. I studied glasses as well in 1979. The paper he is citing was appeared in Inquiry in 1985. In 1979, in fact, I started the whole debate. In 1979, I wrote a cover story for New Scientist called Can Science Come Back to Islam? where some of these issues, if you go back to that new scientist issue, some of these issues are, there was no word for what was happening in terms of Quran and science in those days. I invented the word Bukhariism because there was no this. You see, in philosophy and ideas, new terms come about. Like during my time, there was no such thing as pseudoscience. Nobody talked about pseudoscience for the next 30 years. They only started talking about pseudoscience in 1999 or 2001, around that period. So I invented a word, Bukhariism. Why? Because that was the most popular title. Now, we have to study people like Maurice Bucaille, who was not a Muslim, who was not a scientist, he was a third-grade surgeon. 30, 40 different translations, not millions, billions of copies sold. Every single Islamic bookshop in the world will have today a copy of Quran, Bible, and blah, 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 where he's arguing, you know, this kind of stuff that he's talking about. We have to talk about Yahya Adnan Roof. Whether he is Turkish or not makes no bloody difference because his influence is vast.
This is
There are-
popular.
there are
This is
schools.
popular, not scientific, please.
No, it doesn't matter.
Well, we did talk about pseudoscience.
There are schools in England.
That's
which
why
have
your
the copies of
pseudoscience does not match anything in Quranic understanding, as Professor mentions.
No, that
No,
is
again,
Pseudoscience.
we are
Again, I'm telling you that
I
Quran
think-
is not
okay.
scientific.
I think,
You-
Prof. Osman, he will harmonize, I think, both of these. Please, Prof. Osman, we need your wise words, please.
But I have to say that he's part of the pseudoscience. Hussein Nasser was very briefly made. In 1990s, when I was involved in all this debate, I came to the conclusion that I don't want to have anything to do with it.
No.
When in Pakistan, let me finish. When in Pakistan, they officially sanctioned and funded a project to get energy from jinn. It was a vast article I wrote in New Scientist. I think the title is A Bright Spark or something like that, where I say, I have nothing to do with this debate anymore. I do not want to engage in Islamic science debate. And I have not written a single thing since that time on Islamic science, because I was so disgusted by it all, in a sense. And I'm afraid Hussein Nasser was part of my disgust. Not Usman Bakar, because I liked his book on classification.
Yes, Brother Sardar. If Zawdin Sardar is the criteria of what science and what science is not, then we have to be in different, you know. Yes, we are in different universes, yes. All right. Now I want to be, basically, we are listening to your presentation. I think the key word in your presentation, which is a contested word, of course, is pseudo. Basically, I mean, that's how I see it. That is the source of the debate, basically. What is pseudo? I didn't think you define it. I didn't see that you define that term. But and I understand you're also a philosopher. As far as I know, philosophers, normally they define the term they want to present, because in order to avoid misunderstanding, and that's very, very important. What is pseudo and what is not pseudo? To answer that question, I want to go back earlier to the Islamic tradition, the Islamic philosophical tradition, scientific tradition, not Harun Yahya or something like that. I mean, I think it's to belittle Islamic civilization as a whole, to discuss this very important topic by quoting just a few people whom I don't take seriously, to be honest. Yeah.
We all reject that.
I know. No, wait. Let me say. I know that Dr. Zenesda, you reject that. All right. Yeah, I know that. Yeah. All right. So, to go back to Islamic tradition, because they define. When I say they, I mean referring to the mainstream. Not everybody, of course, but the mainstream scientific thought. They find that. They define that not in their capacity as scientists, but as philosophers of science. Because the concept of pseudo is not a problem of science. It is a problem of philosophy of science, right? So therefore, that term, yeah, it is a term in philosophy of science, not a scientific problem. They don't teach this. Scientists don't teach what pseudo and not pseudo. Philosophers do. Theologians do. All right? Yeah. So I think that is important. I just want to for the others to speak. So what was the standard definition, the standard idea of what is a science? And anything other than that is a deviation from science. What is called in Arabic ilm, with the plural ulum, different than in the singular. It's two different in the context. Yeah? All right. So we're talking about ilm. The plural is ulum, the science and the sciences. To call a body of knowledge a science, it must fulfill 4 criteria. That's correct. What's the first criteria? A well-defined object of study, subject matter. That is clear. We have the sciences because they are defined by that. Yeah. So a pseudoscience cannot even tell what really it's not well-defined subject matter. The second criteria, they are the foundation of that discipline of the science. All right. It's clear, it's well-defined. And there are different layers. There are different layers of foundation. Yeah. Epistemological foundation of every science is multi-layered. The physical layer, the cosmological layer, or even the psychological layer, as well as the metaphysical layer. The layers are based on the Quran. They're all based on the Quran. The data based on the Quran. Okay. Then the third criteria is well-defined methodology. The belief is that there is no such thing as a standard method that is applicable to all the sciences. Every science uses its own methodology. You cannot compare the methodology of physics with methodology of biology, because biology deals with living form, right? You just to cut short that one. Then, and of course, all the ideas of methodology are in the Quran and the Hadith. They have been formulated. And then finally, the goal of that science. Each science has its own distinctive goal. It's not two sciences cannot have the same epistemological goals. The immediate purpose of why we study that science. This applies to every science. This is how for hundreds of years Muslim scientists work and function as scientists within that framework. So I think it's clear how Muslims in the past deal with problem of what pseudoism. So in Europe, 19th century Europe, they debated was psychology a science or not. You know that very well. Yeah, they say that psychology was a pseudoscience.
Never good question to ask him is eugenic a pseudoscience.
Yeah.
Now being conducted at MIT at this moment in time. Is it a pseudoscience?
So yes, in the West, they have debate about the pseudoscience. Example, debate around psychology in 19th century Europe under the influence of positivism, because there have been phases in the West when the concept of pseudo was very much debated along ideological lines. Philosophical line. So what kind of philosophy you hold to, that will determine basically your understanding of what pseudo and not pseudo. That's my view. Thank you.
Okay. First off, yes, Harunyaya is a problem because you see his books on meters of bookshelves in bookshops. So to an ordinary Muslim, he's an expert. So that's a problem, and he has to be dealt with at some level. The issue of pseudoscience and pulling science out of the Quran or finding a connection between the two, part of the problem, I think, is confirmation bias. People who try to look in the Quran to find the science, they have a particular understanding of the Quran, and then they will look for that understanding in the science. And what they will often do is overlook the bits of the science that don't match their understanding of the Quran. The gentleman who's done the work on the mountains, the geochemist, I forget his name. He's the Egyptian geochemist.
Naik,
Najjar,
Najjar,
that's
He's a
right.
geologist.
He's, yeah, he's actually,
Oh,
from what I understand, his background's in
that's it.
geochemistry. But I've also met him
Mhm.
and had some discussions with him. His work on the mountains, for instance, overlooks key aspects of tectonics because they refute his arguments. At one point, he was in a discussion with someone else during a lecture and he rejected carbon dating. He said
Oh.
radiometric dating doesn't work and carbon dating doesn't work. Now, I pointed out to him that carbon dating is cross-checked with historically dated artifacts. They cross-check it with tree ring dates, which are well understood. And he said, how do they do it with tree ring dates? And I explained to him how tree rings are formed. And he was under the impression that the oldest tree rings on a tree were on the outside of the tree, which means the tree starts off big as a hollow shell and then grows inwards. So, you know, and that's part of the problem. People will look outside their area of expertise as well and not understand the science. That's why you have the problem with Quranic embryology. It overlooks an enormous amount of stuff and mismatches real embryology with their ideas they pulled from the Quran.
Yeah, again, I understand, and I hope you understand that a presentation has to be a summary. So I think I was careful to say, although I'm labeling them, so to speak, as creationists, not all those people in the first line are equal. Professor Syed Hossein Nasr, for instance, arrives at a rejection of evolution, but on metaphysical grounds. Metaphysical grounds that I disagree with, but then again, the way I regard it, it's bad metaphysics. It's not pseudoscience. There are certain forms, there are certain ways of rejecting evolution that are not metaphysical, but they are pseudoscientific. And I'm not sure why my mention of Harun Yahya is so irritating to you. Uh, um, the reason, as I always put it, I'm not studying these people because I think that they are important. I study them because other people think they are important. And unfortunately, those people are all over the place. And of course, they're not my references. I don't tell my students, hey, go watch those videos. They do already. That's the point. I mentioned YouTubers.
But you are scientists, professor.
Sorry?
You are scientists and you are doing scientific activities, right?
As I said, I have a background in philosophy and I do history of ideas. So if in Muslim history, broadly defined, at some point there is some person who says, I'm Muslim and this is my Muslim take on evolution.
Or non-Muslim. Muslim is believer. You are doing scientific activity.
You know, as far as I know, Harun Yahya may be a believer.
Looking for pseudo-scientific.
Do you have a believer meter to identify who's a believer and who's
In
not?
this geography, there are many pseudo-scientific activities, okay?
In this?
You
Sorry.
just go around Gampung over here village, you can find many pseudo-scientifics, bomb of people, okay?
Too
Or
bad.
bomb of people.
Okay, yeah,
No,
thank you.
but again, my problems with Harun Yahya is not whether he's a believer or not, and I have no believer
He's
meter.
charlatan, 19th century, exactly charlatan. That's why he's now in the jail. He misdirected people. He's not
I don't think
neither pseudoscientist or
he's not in
or
jail for being a pseudoscientist, by the way.
Maybe Prof. Aziz wants to say something. Yeah, please, please.
No problem. I think
He's
no problem. I think this
and
is, this
no,
is
I would like
he's
to.
not,
Just a second.
excuse me,
Just a
he-
second.
no problem, no problem. This is just a very scientific discussion.
we do this one, Hocam.
If you allow me, let's go scientific then.
Prof,
Everybody
everybody is entitled to ideas.
He's the leader
and
of
that's
illegal
really good.
organization.
But I think what Dr. Uzai is saying, maybe many here follow what he say, what you are saying. Many also follow what you say, and we are deliberating and
Okay.
getting to the truths and ideas.
Excuse
Okay,
me.
so yes, Yes.
cannot be qualified as pseudoscience because they don't claim it to be science.
Yeah, that's why I think when you said
Yes.
Yahya is a charlatan, charlatan.
me,
You
okay,
say
that's-
scientific.
But you see, you're telling me I'm right. I mean,
Excuse
you see,
Can I say something as a Turk?
Scientific and non-scientific. You are looking at one of them, it's stupid charlatan.
again, I did.
Okay. No, he's not qualified in
Because
science.
he's copy paste.
That's
Not
what I
scientific.
said.
Okay,
That's what I
okay.
said.
All right, all right.
Dr. Naim, may I offer something more scientific?
One more thing. No, I think that Professor
not
here
qualified
mentioned
in
something
science.
very important.
He's
Yes.
expert.
No,
He's the
no.
leader of illegal
he-
organization.
No, he mentioned something very important that I would like to touch on. So
Yeah.
we had a bumpy start. I forgot to mention that also it's not by coincidence that as a non-Muslim with a philosophical background, I work with a Muslim with a scientific background. Again, there is something very important in there. The series Islam and the Sciences is about, in fact, the natural sciences. If we take the word science, of course, it has a long history, and it can also be taken to mean, knowledge in general or structured knowledge, as you have in German, Wissenschaft. Here, when I refer to science, I'm talking about the natural sciences, and those can be defined in different ways, including through Galileo Galilei's original methodology. The reason why I did not provide you with a general philosophical definition of pseudoscience is that I don't think it works. Yes, I'm a philosopher, and some philosophers are into general definitions, but I'm an analytical philosopher. And analytical philosophers are into opening each box and discussing it in its own right. So I can mention specific cases of pseudoscientific items in, let's say, creationism. Again, not all creationism is pseudoscientific. Specific pseudoscientific items in Ijaz Ilmi, not all Ijaz Ilmi is pseudoscientific. And I can tell you why by certain criteria it's pseudoscientific. For instance, if you say, these verses of the Quran talk about the embryo, that could be good or bad tafsir. I'm not qualified to say. If you say, this is a prediction of how the embryo works, because nobody in the history of humanity ever talked about the embryo before, that is pseudoscience, because you are distorting information that is out there for everyone to verify. And the same goes for specific cases of resistance to evolution. If someone tells me evolution is not scientific because there is a missing link, well, I'm sorry, but missing link is not even a scientific concept. Maybe Gary can confirm that. So I provided no general definition because there is none, but I can defend each and every critique and criticism of specific example of pseudoscientific claim that I discuss in the booklet. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. We're not here to attack him. Yeah, no, we're not here to attack him, he looks at a different. So. All right. Okay, please, I don't know.
No.
Okay, you want to say something?
You know, there's an interesting, I'm wondering if I'm getting you right, because I feel like the question you're asking is, why should we study pseudoscientists? Right? Is that sort of what you might be kind of
At
aiming
the
at?
end of the day, you are talking about the truth. This is very important.
Yeah.
Okay, if you cannot define, in sciences, we start by definitions, right? From sociology until the hard sciences. If you cannot define a thing, an object, how you claim truth or compare with the truth? Some other people, some other scientists claim that this is truth. So it means that there is missing gap, but in different perspective.
Okay.
You say, I could not define pseudo-scientific. Okay. Bomo does not claim I am scientific, but the others claim that Bomo scientific.
Yeah.
Right? Or shaman scientific. Look at the anthropologist studies. You can find multiple studies. This is science. But Bomo or shaman does not claim I am scientific.
Right.
So if you cannot define pseudo-scientific, I guess there is significant problem you compare or try to understand Islam or Islamic
Yeah.
understand whatever.
Now, if I'm so if I'm understanding this correctly, I believe the claim you're making is you don't want to sit on a hardened general definition of pseudoscience.
Yeah, because there is none.
Because there isn't. Okay.
Yeah,
And that would
but
be, okay.
there is a way to describe and effectively
You
that.
can't say there is none. You can say you haven't found one.
Yeah. Actually, no, that's a good point. Because
Okay, assalamu alaikum.
I'm sorry, could I finish? I had, sorry, let me just kind of what the whole point I was going for is that just because we can't necessarily agree on said definitions or what exactly the claims are, I think there's an importance to study these things. And even if we think someone is a charlatan or someone is the worst person on earth, you need to study these bastards
But the
because
people-
otherwise they have power.
I'm sorry, the people who followed the gentleman in Turkey lost their belief. Right?
Well, I mean, that's a different discussion though, but
Yeah,
I mean,
different,
it's a different
different,
discussion,
but the thing that is scientific or not scientific.
but
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, I'm just a student, so I was confused. I read scientific literature, also Islamic literature. So when I read scientific literature, what happens is that they claim as scientific truth. So I find like humans like created the God. That means in evolutionary history, in 13.7 billion years, the concept of God came within, like, let's say, four or sorry, to a few million years within the human minds. That's how evolutionary things speaks. When it comes to Islamic literature, the way it says like Allah has created the humans. So when you are talking about like pseudoscience, so which one should I think that this is pseudoscience, Islam or like this, the one you are talking about, like so-called natural science as truthful? So I was thinking like God created humans or humans created God. Thank you so much.
Let me, yeah, because you said you want to go into some scientific arguments regarding creationism, yeah. Okay, actually, we discussed this book. This is my book. We touched the question. The title is Adam alayhi salam and the Origin of Man, Reconciling the Conflict Between Religious and Scientific Narratives. We had the book discussion a few days ago. And some of the stuff that you mentioned here is already mentioned in the book, even the Wallace thing and all that, especially the four there, creationism and all that. Okay, regarding this, I wish to quote because Prof. Osman Bakar did this book called Critique of the Evolutionary Theory in 1987, in which he compiled a number of essays. Yeah, so there is one essay titled "Life as a Non-Historical Reality," written by Giuseppe Simonti. Do you know that name? Yes, died and passed away. He lived 1925 to 2018. Was a professor of genetics and leading contemporary phylogist in Italy, well known for criticizing natural selection as the deciding factor of human biology. He was professor of embryology at the University of Perugia, where he was also the editor of Revista di Biologia. I put it in my book. So basically what he said that increasing number of scientists have found out that the formation of life and variety of species happen very early or very quickly. Thus, the problem of origin is outside the domain of understanding of science. Okay, among the reason he quoted, this is technical, but I just quote because I took from the book. For example, the amount of DNA per nucleus in a different organism is divided into two orders of magnitude. Millions of nucleotide pairs in prokaryotes and billions of nucleotide pairs in eukaryotes. The prokaryotic DNA is not protein bound, exhibits too high reactivity. This is very technical, but I'm saying there exist scientific arguments against evolution. They exist, although they might be it's not properly mentioned, but they exist. Anyway, I just want to move on from here to this part, yeah. Okay, because you mentioned Rana Dajini, her name, whatever, and Nida Gusem, who totally accept 100% evolutionism. That means that he must have interpreted the Quranic verses as allegorical. In that sense, may I quote the Quranic verse, yeah, regarding man? Okay, the very first in the second chapter, Surah Al-Baqarah, yeah, verse number 30. Indeed, I will make. Oh shit.
Well,
Sorry.
way to the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you just
Okay,
move
no. Let
to the point
me. Yeah. Okay.
question?
Okay, no. This is important. Indeed, I will make upon the earth a successful authority. They said, will you please place upon it one who causes corruption, therein, and sheds blood? While we declare you praise and sanctity, you, Allah said, indeed, I know that which you do not know. This is the first verse regarding creation of man. And then regarding the shape of man, this is on the 7th chapter, verse 11. And surely we created you. That means Adam, and then gave you shape. And then we told the angels prostrate to Adam, and they prostrate, except Iblis, he persevered. Okay. And then Allah said, we prevented you, Iblis, that you did not prostrate when I commanded. Iblis said, I am better than him. You created me from fire, and him you created from clay. So that is mentioned in the Quran. So if for somebody who interpreted this literally, of course, they say there's a certain one person created from clay. For somebody who says this is allegorical, they might equate it the process of evolution and all that. They say this is also allegorical. That depends on how you interpret it. So in this case, yeah, for you as a scientist, since you believe in evolution, you believe in what Indra Gustam say, how do you interpret that when you say, you created me from fire? That means the Iblis, the jinn, you created me from fire.
Thank you, thank you. Okay,
How,
Brother Arif,
how would you
go on.
interpret that?
Go on, Brother Arif.
Grazie mille. Thank you very much, Professor. I appreciate the conversation and the animated responses from everyone here. I think the primary issue, if I can call it that, is the issue of epistemology, of how we know what we know. So one person might come from a religious perspective, one other person might come from a scientific perspective. But I think a common threat actually is faced by all of us, which is, I would say, AI would be a threat. And my question is with regards to evolution in terms of artificial intelligence, about how we know what we know, again, epistemology. So would we say that moving past a human being, a human being if you believe in evolution, what is the final form of a human being according to pseudoscience or even science? Thank you.
It's very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. So I don't know. I have no idea. But speaking of AI, we will have soon a booklet on Islam and artificial intelligence. I'm not sure I understood why you mentioned Giuseppe Sermonti, but Giuseppe Sermonti was a creationist. So someone who rejected evolution. There is a problem here because if Giuseppe Sermonti was right, then Harun Yahya is no longer a charlatan. But that's not my problem.
I only mention it regardless because he took a scientific stand regarding it. He rejected by science according to his scientific knowledge.
So you ask me how I interpret the Quran. I don't interpret the Quran. It's not my job.
This is the point I was making. Can I
Just
just
a
come
bit,
back?
okay, and then we'll end. All right.
Okay, so I want to say a couple of very, very important things. One is that yesterday, Scott was showing around the exhibition, the Post-Normal Times exhibition. Some very learned people were there. And there was one Muslim scholar who kept on saying, but doesn't the Prime Minister know that the only true source of knowledge is Quran and Hadith? Fine. Last week, I got an email from somebody called Khalid Young. I forwarded to my, who says everything you can possibly believe in science and technology can be found in the Quran and the Hadith. Last sentence of Usman Bakar, I agreed with everything. Last sentence of what he said was, almost everything about science can be found in the Quran and Hadith. This is a dangerous fallacy. This is a very, very dangerous fallacy. And many people here believe this. I know that because I engage with people. This is a dangerous fallacy for two reasons. Quran is a book of guidance. It's not a book of facts. It's not a book of science. It's not a book of geography. I know Rajib Najjar, he taught me. Right? I think he was assistant secretary. I was assistant secretary when he was a member of the first executive in the 1968, 69. I know him very, very well. I read his book. I know his ideas. This is a dangerous fallacy because it assumes that we can do science without doing science. By simply reading the religious texts, by memorizing the hadiths and repeating them again and again, we can do science.
Hojam,
No,
this
we
is not
can't.
true. This is not true.
Let me finish. Let me finish. Yeah, that's a different thing. History, I know history of Islam. That is a different thing. That is a different thing. This is
Okay, Prof,
no, I am absolutely the right. The only way you can do real science.
I would like to.
Yeah.
Brother, please
No, because this is very, very important.
Yeah.
No, Prof, this is very important. I think you misinterpreted me.
All right, I stand
Yeah,
corrected.
yeah. Because I did not say that all scientific facts are found in the Quran. I didn't. But you give me the impression to others that to Osman, this is very dangerous thinking, no? No?
No, no, I'm not saying that.
Ah, you know, I only mentioned in reference to the four elementals, the structure of science. That's all. That was the context.
Okay.
Huh? The subject matter.
All right.
I didn't say that the subject matter, everything is found in the Quran. No, not that one. But I did refer to the foundation. The elements on the foundation, the physical or the cosmological, the metaphysical, those elements of foundation are found in the Quran. It's different, yeah? Okay. Then the second thing I find is the methodology. I'm saying that the methods how to obtain knowledge, the avenues, they are also found in the Quran. That's all. The rest we have to find on our own.
Okay, we leave the dean.
As long
to-
as
And
long
that's
we
what I
have to
meant.
find on our own, we are on the same boat.
Prof, and that's what I meant by truth, exactly what Prof. Asman mentioned.
We have to roll our own sleeves,
If you-
do our own science, make our own discoveries.
Let's have a seminar on that, Prof.
It comes from hard work and not simply by reading the scripture.
Let's have a seminar on this. We will not differ. We will not differ, believe me.
Close the microphone there. We'll conclude with Prof. Our dean. Can you close that microphone? Sorry. Close. Yeah. Okay. Turn on. Sorry.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is really a wonderful day. This is the starting of the scientific revolution at Istac here. You see. So really wonderful to listen to these great scholars here. Because we are not, all of us, we are not speaking Quran. And we are not speaking hadith. We are doing mistakes. We are interpreting. We are doing. That's why the best thing to have is to have the mind where we really listen and think. And we move from there. And we don't impose on anyone our perspective or our philosophers or scientists' views or anyone else. So what is important, I think, in this context, and I hope, as Prof. Jesse said, we should have more lengthy discussions like this and have more differences. And from there, we move forward. But what is important is we need to think paradigm. We need to think from systems, from models, from approaches, because sometimes you're just talking about a very sophisticated issue and then just comment there, comment there, comment there, but we don't know what model, what approach, what paradigm we use really to answer questions or to, and that's why we really need to train our people. If you take the scientific approach, it's okay. If you take the religious approach, it's okay. If you take the philosophical approach, it's okay. But as I think Prof. Sardar mentioned in the beginning, we need to have some common grounds of terms so that we debate and we go and we discuss. That's one thing. I'm going to give you another lecture now. That's number one. Number two, this is another great reason to really go back to the Quran and to the Sunnah and really understand the scientific mind that the Quran builds, so that we don't accuse the Quran or we say that the Quran actually is that book who tells us, I have سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق. We'll show them our sign, our patterns, our laws in nature and in themselves until they know that it is the truth. What does this mean? It means that science itself will become your tool to prove that what the Quran says is correct, as long as you really discover the laws using the right methodology. That's one. Number two, the Quran says, قُلْ هَاتُوا بُرْهَانَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Get your evidence. Don't just come and tell me your philosophy or your whims or your things. That's why there is, to me, there is no book talks about experiment, about empirical, like the Quran. And that's what we see in the history of Islam when we talk about Ibn Sina or Al-Ghazali. But they thought and they produced knowledge at that time. But today, We are having challenges of post-normal, of this. So to me, what I got from here today is that particularly as scholars and Muslim researchers, we need really to discover the universal truths of the Quran and present them to the world using the scientific methodology, using the right methodology, because we cannot just go on by emotional things and all this, and then in the end we are trying to interpret. The world is very sophisticated, the creation is very sophisticated, life is very sophisticated, the human being is very sophisticated, but what is needed is that Quranic methodology. That's why the epistemological Quranic methodology is our power to interpret the universe and life and to deal with all this type of things. That's why to me, when our brother doctor is talking, I can exactly differentiate between what is great and good in what he's saying and what is to me nothing, using the Quranic approach. But I will argue with him later, and we will have more. We will have more. We will invite you. I tell you, if I'm still alive and I'm here, I tell you to come for 1 week here and give all your theories, your ideas, your things. And I will get Dr. Ozai to bring all his theories and his views. We move forward from here. I think that's what the tradition, the approach, the mind that we need to move forward. May God bless you all. Doctor, you have done a great job. You give a good lecture. We differ with you in we differ with you in several things here and this. I really thank Prof. Sadar for stimulating all this, all sparking all these ideas. And I like all the Discord. Yes, yes. So, yes. Inshallah, take it easy. And we have a long way to go in really building that scientific Quranic mind to move forward and navigate the world.
Yeah.
We will give a souvenir to our
Sure.
brother.
Summary. I've seen you a couple times before, we didn't get your name. Scott Jordan. Scott Jordan? Yeah. John. What's your summary? The hardened definitions, it doesn't necessarily sit in the hardened definition. What's very insightful, like the claims that you're made.
Well, that's.
Are you also a professor?
No, I'm just a scholar. I work with Professor Tia. So, we're,
Oh,
yeah. So we're at the Center for